Hello and welcome to our first Finovate webinar of 2024. My name is David Penn. I'm a research analyst with Finovate. Joining me today is Joseph McLean. He is founder and CEO of Quavo Fraud and Disputes, and we're going to be talking about 4 game-changing benefits of modernizing your fraud and dispute management. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely, David. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. We've got a great deal to talk about. There's going to be an opportunity for folks who are listening along to send in some questions. We're going to take care of those toward the end of our conversation today. But I wanted to go ahead and get us started off, maybe from the top, with you telling us a little bit about yourself and the founding of Quavo.
Yeah, great. Happy to. As you said, my name's Joe McLean. I'm the CEO and one of 4 co-founders of Quavo, where we do specialize in back office fraud and dispute processing. I have, too long to remember. I think about 25 years in banking and in the fraud and dispute space. I started with a credit card company when I was in college doing outbound fraud detection. That was MBNA in Newark, Delaware, and then I moved over to Bank of America through that acquisition in the mid 2000s, and continued my journey in technology and in fraud and disputes until 2016, when a few of us decided that the time was right to sort of leave the giant corporate America space and move into a market that we were very familiar with and we thought was underserved, which is the back office processing of the fraud and dispute. So that really was the impetus to the beginning of this company. So we started off doing a lot of services work, and we bootstrapped the company, which was fantastic. It was very difficult, and continued to build out our product. And I would say, it took us a good 4 years to get to the place where we thought it was where we wanted it to be, and very stable and marketable. And it's really the last 3 years expanding our market share as we've solved these problems for issuers and fintech companies alike.
Some of these problems are some of the things that I want to talk a little bit more about. I like how you pointed out sort of carving a niche with regard to back office operations and fraud and dispute management. I wonder if you could talk to us about some of the biggest challenges that these fintechs and these issues are having when it comes to these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. We generally bucket into 4 different items that a bank or a fintech will be having, and these issues, they could be having one of these issues or all 4 of these issues. A lot of times it depends on the portfolio, whether you're dealing with prepaid or wage cards or subprime or credit unions or just normal regular banking. You see the variety, but the 4 issues that we almost always see, where people are having a hard time solving, are regulatory. So we've got Reg E and Reg Z, where there's a lot of requirements around unauthorized transactions and timing and account holder communication that can be challenging for financial institutions. The second piece is really around back office expenses. Typically, people are solving this problem by throwing a lot of bodies at it, which isn't a cost-effective way, especially considering it's a compulsory piece of work for a financial institution, where by reg they have to do it, and Visa and MasterCard have requirements around it as well. So if you want to issue their products, this is something you have to solve. And what we do see is financial institutions generally solving it with people, which can be very, very expensive. The third problem that we typically see is around loss lines. There's a lot of fraud, right? It's something that everybody's familiar with, and most people have been a victim of at some point in time, and it's not ending anytime soon. So banks will always be challenged with how to reduce their fraud losses. Fraud prevention in the front end is one way, but also in the back end, there's a lot of ways to recover and make sure that you as a financial institution aren't losing that money. And really the 4th pillar that we talk about a lot is, and this is my favorite one, it's account holder experience, right? How do we ensure that our clients, customers are receiving the best possible experience that they can in a difficult situation? Nobody likes having fraud on their account. Nobody likes having to dispute a transaction. But how do we make that as easy as possible and solve it as quickly as we possibly can, on behalf of financial institutions for their end account holders?
Very interesting. And again, I liked the point that you made again, distinguishing between fraud prevention and some of the things you talked about in terms of recovery as a particular area. And you also mentioned some of the things that FIs are doing right now, trying to address the problem that perhaps aren't addressing the problem as well as it could be. You talked about, for example, the people, sort of throwing the people at it problem. I'm wondering, is that sort of the main failing that a lot of the FIs are doing? They're either throwing people or money at the problem. What are some of the things that they're trying to do that just aren't working?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated use case. As I stated at the top, I've spent a lot of time in banking, and I've worked in a lot of these what we call complex case management situations. So whether it be customer complaints or credit bureau disputes or active military work or estate planning, all those sorts of things that are these complex items. Fraud and disputes is the most complex problem for most banks. And I think that's the challenge, and that's why they end up throwing people out because they can't find the right technologies to solve this problem. Maybe they try to build it in-house, and it just doesn't quite get them where they need to be, or perhaps they use something that maybe their core banking engine or their transaction processor provides to them that isn't a full solution, and only really takes part of the problem out of the equation. So I would think, say a lack of technological solutions is really the main failing. And what that leads to is having to hire a large number of people to solve this problem because it is complex. And that's generally what we've seen. And it was one of the reasons that we started this company is we saw everybody trying to solve this problem and generally just not having tech and adding people to their workforce. And we knew we could provide technology that would automate large portions of this process and really allow banks to solve this problem faster, to solve it more efficiently and with less cost, and it's a better experience all around.
That definitely makes a lot of sense. And we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about some of these technologies, more specifically, talking about some of the experiences of companies as they've gone through this process of a greater digital transformation or adoption of these technologies. But I wanted to talk about specifically Quavo's approach to this, which I'm going to assume does involve a lot of this technology. One of the phrases that we use in the address of the webinar was the idea of modernizing fraud and dispute management. And I can imagine over the course of your career, to modernize has meant different things at different times. So here in 2024, what does it mean to modernize fraud and dispute management as far as you're concerned?
I look at modernize now, and I've seen a million definitions of the word modernize, and especially in banking, so you've nailed it. But I look at modernization in really two perspectives. You can modernize your technology, which I think most people understand, right? I'm going from an old, antiquated technology into a newer solution. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, you need to modernize your business. And I think that's where the failing of a lot of this is. I'm sure we'll talk about the tech a lot, but I'd like to focus just for a minute on the operational process side. What we do different, and maybe I actually will start with how the industry has historically handled this problem is, a fraud or dispute case comes in the door and you assign it to a person, and a person has to solve all of the processes along the way, right? So maybe there's 15 or 20 steps, and this thing lasts for 3 months. And you kind of assign it, it's almost like a case file that gets assigned to a person, and they work it from end to end. And what we see is that approach just doesn't work. It's not efficient. Especially when you couple it with technology. So the way that we have brought this in is we actually have the system, our QFD application, own the case. And we automate as much of that process and the steps along the way as we possibly can. And we only bring in humans to work exceptions that the system can't solve for. So if you look at the business process as you don't need a person to own a case, you only need a person to really assembly line work the exceptions that fall out of that case. Right. And obviously we didn't invent the assembly line, but there's a reason that it's so effective. For us and what we've seen, it allows our clients to drastically reduce the number of people because they end up focusing specifically on the areas that you actually need human intervention versus really having to look across that, the entire panorama of the fraud and dispute process. They're allowed to focus on one piece. It reduces context switching that users can struggle with throughout the course of their day. And it allows users to build up expertise in certain parts of the process to become far more efficient when they're working those cases. So to us, that our shift in how operations should handle this problem has really been one of the large reasons that we've been so successful in our time.
It's really interesting, and it makes quite a bit of sense, both starting from the most basic idea that we've heard in other aspects of fintech and financial services, the hybrid model of using the technology and the person sort of there to sort of tend it and mind it, step in when things get a little bit more complex. But the more I hear you discuss it, the more it sort of rises to the level of being, I would have to imagine, on parity, if not more, with the technology in terms of really being able to make the sort of modernization process work, that it's not simply a matter of buying some products, but it really involves some significant rethinking of how companies do what they do. And I'm curious, before we talk a little bit more about the technology, how heavy of a haul is that for companies? That seems like that can be something that, without the proper leadership or even the right culture, that could really be the toughest nut to crack.
Right, and you're absolutely right, David. And it's not insignificant, and that's what makes us a little different from some of our competitors in the marketplace. Is for us, we sell software, but we also sell our expertise. So we have a number of people here that have spent years and years, and maybe entire careers like myself, in the fraud and dispute space. So when you work with Quavo and you work with our software solution, you're not just getting technology thrown over a wall. We will actually go in with our clients to really understand what their processes are and help them transform into our recommended solution. And it's not a 1 month or 2 month situation, right? Like it can take a good year for our clients to really start to see and understand the value that we're bringing into their space. And it's it's funny. It's one of the reasons we refer to the folks that we work with and our partners as clients, not customers, because that's how we feel like that relationship is, and that's how it should be. It's not transactional for us. It is a long-term partnership where we will continue to tune your environment, both on the software and on the business process side, until you are as successful as you should be and you could possibly be. So it's a really cool model, and it's something we're really, really passionate about. But you're right, it takes a lot of expertise on our side, and we like to really import that just as much as we import the software into our clients' ecosystems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That said, I don't want to get short shrift to the technology that's involved, because that certainly does play a major role in being able to help folks do what they do. In terms of some of the key enabling technologies, I know, or I would guess, that AI, automation are some of the things, but maybe you could put into context of what some of these technologies are and how they are enabling some of this modernization of processes that you can talk about.
Yeah, I mean, we've had the good fortune to we've got some very good tech partners that really have enabled us to move the needle on this pretty quickly. I'm not sure if you are with or the listeners are familiar with Pegasystems, which is a software firm out of Boston. We take advantage of a lot of the technology that they offer up, and it allows us to quickly build and pivot across all of our clients. But it has allowed us to get into deep integrations with core banking systems and transaction processors, which is very important because we're pulling data out and we can automate functionality through that business rules engine, right? So it really allows us to take, I mean, you can't imagine the number of business rules in this particular space that we have to deal with, and it allows us to easily, reuse that across our entire portfolio of clients. The AI portion has also been extremely helpful for us, where we're now making these decisions on behalf of banks inside of the software. So obviously that part of the tech stack has been really, really important in terms of the case management piece, the business rules piece, and the reusable integration, and it allowed us to do this work pretty quickly. I mean, we can get a client up and running. If you were to go and build this yourself, I mean, you're talking about a years-long project to get it done, and we can have clients up and running in 4 months because we've taken advantage of the technologies that they provide. We also work pretty closely with AWS on the other side of the house for some of our more complicated AI pieces and things along those lines. So they've been a really good partner. I mean, actually our infrastructure partner as well. So for us, we're always evaluating. We just actually started to really build out the data piece of this and the analytics piece. So we needed a data warehouse partner. We brought in Snowflake there to help us out with that stuff, to allow us to create dashboards and things like that for our clients. So we're diverse in our tech stack, but we like to stay on top of sort of what the cutting edge pieces. So we actually put a lot back into R&D. We have 2 major feature releases a year, and we have probably another 8 or so smaller minor releases that we go through. So we're constantly evolving the technology as we continue to grow.
Yeah, that's interesting and good to hear. One thing I'm curious about, and you hinted at it a little bit in your response a second ago, was a little bit about the experience that some of the institutions that you've worked with have been like. I'm curious if what those experiences have been like, and also if there have been any surprises along the way, for perhaps over the journey from when you first started working with companies, and then maybe instances where you realized, okay, let's try it a little bit differently this way with these sorts of folks because of some of the things that you encountered.
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. I mean, most of our clients have really come to us when they have a problem, right? And it's one of the 4 problems that one or more, right, of the 4 problems that I talked about at the top. And that's not a surprise, right? We know what's out in the market. We know how they're trying to solve this problem. We know where it's not working. So those conversations are generally pretty easy. Like, here's what we can do. Here's how we can help make you successful. We don't even look at it as like an ROI. It's more of a cost takeout. Like, I know you're spending this much money today per dispute to process your work. I know if you use Quavo, you end up spending this much money. We don't bill for implementations. So it kind of, for our clients, it really is just a cost takeout scenario for them. But what's really interesting, I think, is the second half of that. It's the surprises. The one thing I've been in software for a long, long time, and maybe the one constant is your users will always use your software in ways that you couldn't possibly have dreamt of when you were building it, right? It is without fail something that happens. So you kind of expect the surprise, but you don't know what it's going to be, right? It's like Cracker Jack stuff. Like, it's in there and it's coming, but you're never sure what it's going to be. And almost always it's positive, right? So we spend a lot of time talking to our clients about how they use our system. We look at the data and we break it down. And we say, here's where you're being successful. Here's where you're not. And the really cool thing is when you look at the data and you're like, how did they do this? How are they this good? Like, we know our software is good and we believe in it, but they're doing things with it that we can't possibly have imagined. And we'll go ask questions and we'll talk to them about this, and we'll sit with their users and how are you going through your process? And what we like to do is we incorporate all that feedback back into the product. I'll give you a quick example of one of the biggest surprises. We've got a client, they deal in the wage card space, and they've got a significant amount of fraud and disputes. And one of the metrics that we use to measure success is the number of agents that process fraud and disputes per 100,000 disputes a year, right? So in the market, it's about 10. So if you have 100,000 disputes a year, you'll need about 10 people to process. For our clients, it's generally around 3 to 4. And we had a client that was sub 2. And we were like, how do you have so few people working these cases? And we went to them and we were talking to them about it. And it was all about how they were prioritizing their daily workloads. They weren't actually using what we had conscripted. They had built their own thing and said, well, we find this to be more efficient to get the right work in users' hands. So obviously we got very, very excited. We took that back. We added all that back into the product, and we're now rolling that out to all of our clients in this new work routing version. We're already starting to see results as everybody is getting closer and closer to that number. I would never have imagined that we could have gotten down to that low of a number per dispute. I mean, if you think about what that means, with the industry average being around 10, I mean, it's an 80% reduction in workforce. It is not an insignificant number, especially when we definitely have prospects that we talk to that have a couple of hundred people working these cases. I mean, you're talking about being able to offset a significant FTE expense, where now you can take those FTE and maybe put them in something that's actually revenue generating within your business, versus fraud and disputes, which is always a loss. Right? You're not making money from fraud, so you take those folks and you put them into something that makes a lot more sense. So I absolutely love those surprises, and I love talking to our clients about how they're innovating even beyond what we're doing. We'll pull them into requirement sessions and design sessions, because they get excited too, right? They're like, oh, this really cool thing we did. Now we're going to get to do something bigger with it. So those are like the absolutely most fun surprises that we come across.
Fantastic, fantastic. I love the idea of them of being mostly positive and you're trying to figure out what positive in which direction. It's kind of a nice
Right.
circumstance. We talk quite a bit about the benefits for FIs in terms of operational efficiencies and things like that. For the end customers, are there tangible benefits for them, or are there benefits that are translated to you that you hear about from the companies that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. And those are some of the metrics that we measure as well. Specifically, um, the one that we like the most is how quickly we can resolve a dispute. I mentioned earlier, some of these things can have a 90-day tail. They can last even longer, depending on the situation. But for us, we really pay attention to how long it takes for the end customer, the end account holder, to to have this case resolved on their behalf. If you have a few $100s stolen out of your bank account or from your credit card, it weighs on your mind. I mean, it's not an insignificant amount of money, and sometimes it's thousands. Um, and you don't want to sit there for 2 months while you're waiting for your bank to figure this out. So we've really tried to pull that in by making decisions faster in the process, by getting the communications out faster, by using AI to determine, if something is truly fraud, why put it through an investigation? Let's use the AI to have to make that determination and immediately just pay that account holder. So now, on average, I think we get to around 16 or 17 days for a resolution. But a lot of those clients, they get those account holders, they get their resolution within minutes. So you can be notified within minutes that you've gotten your money back. This is paid. You don't have to worry about this anymore. And what a phenomenal account holder experience that is. You're taking this situation that's not great, fraud, right, or disputes, and you're turning into a really, really positive interaction for that account holder. And maybe you'd be surprised, maybe not, but fraud disputes is one of the largest drivers of complaints to that the CFPB tracks. So we also look at those numbers, and we make sure that our client that those numbers of complaints are coming down as well. So yeah, I mean, there's a ton of benefit for the end account holder here in terms of peace of mind, getting this out of the way, something you don't have to worry about anymore, and making sure that you're made whole. And it's great for the banks too, because now that money's back in the account, and that account holder can continue to spend, right? So it's not being held up anywhere.
Yeah, those are fantastic points. I know, I'll confess, the older I get, the more I feel like I'm paying attention to customer experience for a variety of reasons, but like that. And just imagining that you have a dispute, some charge doesn't seem right, and there's that self-doubt that goes into it first. Did I mess up? And then did they mess up? And it just seems like you could almost spend more time wondering when to bring it up or address than it takes to get it resolved in some instances. And in terms of an experience, oh, I've been waiting, thinking about this thing for days. I went to get it resolved, and it was resolved in a matter of minutes. That's a heck of an experience.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we get a lot of really good feedback when we can turn these things around very quickly.
Mhm. Speaking of customers, I wanted to talk a little bit more, and I wanted to also remind our listeners that we are taking questions. So if you do have any questions, we're going to save a little bit of time here in about 10, 15 minutes or so to go through some of those questions. So if you do have those, feel free to send them in, and Joe will be able to address those in just a bit. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about the idea of dispute management. We talked about some of the items. You talked about the idea of speed to resolution, so to speak, as being one of the key metrics. What are some of the other things that really makes for a sound dispute management regime?
So I mentioned, speed to resolution is a big one. I also mentioned the number of users per 100,000 disputes. Those are definitely two that we really pay attention to. A few other ones that are really important is your recovery success rate. So I'm an issuer. I get a fraud or a dispute case in the door. I don't want to be responsible for it. I think the merchant is. So how often are we successfully recovering that back from the merchant? That is a really important number for our financial institution clients. Also, and this one's interesting because it really depends on the portfolio, is, and we see this a lot as a trend in the industry with first person fraud. So somebody opens an account, they go buy a television, they call their bank and they say, I didn't buy a television, right? And that's sort of the thing that we don't always like to talk about because it's this weird sort of fraud situation, but it is perpetrated by the actual account holder. And we also see instances where the account holder will sell their card number to somebody else, and somebody else will use it and perpetrate the fraud. So it gets really interesting. We see that a lot in the prepaid space, the subprime space, the wage card space. So the percent of denials that we can push back, that we can identify this is first person fraud, because now those are all losses that that financial institution doesn't have to take. So we measured that in conjunction with how often those get reopened. So if you're denying a lot of cases and none of them are getting reopened, that means you're denying the right ones, right? And you're holding those people accountable for potential nefarious activity, which is a great metric, especially in those sorts of portfolios. The percent of automation is also very important. We have some clients that we're automating up to 97% of the actions that come through the door. So that one is very important. How often we're hitting the reg dates. Reg E and Reg Z both have dates that you have to hit across the board. So the regulatory metrics are very important. How often accounting is happening in time, how often customer communication is happening in time. Those are really, really important as well. And then there's another one that's really around the number of manual tasks per dispute, and that goes back into measuring FTE. And these are all the things that we put on our dashboards, and we try to get these numbers out to our clients so that they can understand sort of the four pillars I talked about at the beginning. We line all these data points back up with one or more of those pillars so that everybody can understand and see the value of the software that we're bringing in.
Mm-hmm. Makes quite a bit of sense. I want to go ahead and, again, we do have some audience questions that have come in. If folks do have questions, there's still a bit of time. I've got some sort of summary questions that I wanted to present to Joe as well, but I thought maybe we could ask these questions first and make sure we get those taken care of. And then some of the summary stuff, Joe will be able to wrap up in his own fashion. So let's go ahead and jump on those so that folks can have some of these concerns addressed. The first one is, how do you recommend advocating for a technology upgrade when fraud and disputes are already viewed as a cost center, which is something I remember you mentioning a little while ago?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it's something that obviously we talk about a lot in our sales cycle, as well as we're talking to prospects. And that's, and I mentioned earlier, we really look at it as cost takeout. We don't want our potential buyers to have to go out and ask for some large capital budget to come back and buy our technology. So we do the implementation for free. And what we say is you immediately start receiving benefit. So, and we love to help prospects out, like putting these business cases together. If you look at your total cost of fraud and disputes, right, the number of people you have, what you do in the branch, your technology costs, management costs, project management costs, you add them all together and you say, okay, I'm paying on average, $20 per dispute for every dispute that comes in the door as an institution. And then you look at somebody like Quavo who says, okay, well, great. What we can do is the cost of our software and consulting is X, but we can make you 70% more efficient. So we're going to bring your $20 per dispute down, and we're going to bring it down to somewhere around 8 to 10. We're going to cut your costs in half. And you don't have to invest anything. It's why I hate actually talking about ROI, because there is no I. It is just, you pay this today, you'll pay less tomorrow. And that's really where we like to focus. So, we're happy to walk through those sorts of business cases. If you're considering looking at a new solution, that is definitely something we will help you come up with, and hopefully you get to avoid having to go after executive signatures and things like that, because your expense ask is not going up; it's actually going to be reduced.
Excellent. I love that. There's no I. That's a good one. Here's another question that came in, a little bit more specific, but it's, let's see. Does the offering support multi-tenant capabilities, and more specifically, multi-programs, brands, and products? That makes sense as a question. What does Quavo have to say to that?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. We have several clients. Obviously, our SaaS environment is multi-client in and of itself. So we've got dozens of clients and sitting inside of our multi-tenant environment. But inside of that, and this is where it gets really, really fun in banking, especially as banking as a service continues to grow, some of our clients have hundreds of programs that they have to manage inside of their environment. So we have their environment, and then inside of that, it's like Russian nesting dolls, right? So you sort of just keep going down and continuing to expand. And we do support that multi-client environment as well. And what's really cool is we've been able to build out what we call self-configuration. So for our clients that have programs like this, they can manage those programs themselves inside of that environment. If they need to make changes to thresholds or documentation or whatever, they can manage their own programs environments without having to come back to Quavo for a change. And we've got it down to the point now where even no new programs can be added on in a single day. So if they sign up a new program, it is really, really easy to onboard that new program into their environment. And it's something we spent a lot of time on because we had multiple clients in that situation where they are, we call a multi-tenant, multi-client environment. And we do it pretty seamlessly, and we've gotten a lot of really good feedback about enabling our clients with programs to manage their ecosystems.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Good to hear. It makes quite a bit of sense. Let's take a look. I'll get a couple of more questions here, and I do think we've got plenty of time. This one person is asking, as more fintechs and institutions are issuing cards, that's definitely the case, what should they know about regulatory obligations? I guess it's for folks who are getting into some of these new areas of card issuance. What are some of the things, and what role does Quavo play in helping make sure they stay on the right side of things?
Yeah, I mean, what they should know is that they exist and they have to abide by them. David, it's funny. I've had some conversations with folks that are, getting into the space, and they're like, well, we issue this kind of card, so we don't have to abide by these regs, and you definitely do. And I think people sort of overlook that part of the business. You get so excited about opening accounts and growing assets that you sort of forget the regulatory piece of it. And we've had some clients grow really, really fast, much faster than they expected. And once you hit sort of that 10 billion in assets, they really start to look at you in a different light. So it gets interesting. So regs exist, and they are complicated, and you have to understand them and you have to abide by them. I mean, whether you want to or not, or you think they're fair or not, you've got to do it. But what's great with us is we make it pretty seamless. For 17 years, I worked at large financial institutions where we talked about regs all the time. It was top of mind, most important thing. We invested a ton of money to make sure we were compliant for fraud and disputes. And we have set our solutions up in such a way that we don't really talk to our clients about regs a whole lot. We show them the metrics that they're good. They can hand those off to auditors. The system is fully auditable. So when somebody comes in to look at it, they just hand them the keys and say, do all your digging. You're not going to find anything. And it's great. It's almost become sort of this kind of afterthought for our clients, which is what I want it to be. I want them to be focused on growing their businesses and providing the best, account holder experience. I do not want them worried about regs. So that's been one of, to go back to surprises from earlier, that's been one of the pleasant surprises. We don't spend a lot of time talking about regs because we're solving the problem seamlessly and our clients don't have to worry about it.
Absolutely. I'm sure they don't mind not having to talk a great deal about regulation.
Yeah, right. And honestly, it's a very boring conversation as well. So nobody's excited to talk about regs.
Excellent. Let's see. I think we've got time to slip in one more question before maybe we could do some top takeaways. We've covered so much ground, but this one is sort of something you've touched on, kind of dovetails with some of the other conversations, and it has to do with the idea of how Quavo supports clients after they've been onboarded. You've talked about that in a couple of ways already. Are there any ways you want to either underscore or add to that maybe you haven't mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the most successful ways, right, is to continue, and I mentioned this earlier, continue to tune the environment, right, to understand where they're doing good, where they're doing bad, constantly look at the data and make sure that we're helping them. I had also mentioned really the product enhancement feedback that we get. It's also very, very critical to that post go live piece. But really, I mean, there's sort of just a baseline set of expectations that we try to meet for all of our clients. If you have a need, there should be somewhere for you to go to. Right, whether it's you've got training needs or you've got just general questions, or perhaps you have an enhancement request. So we've really put a lot into organizing that and putting our clients in a position where they have sort of a voice, right, to talk about their ecosystem and what they need, and it's a place that we can track and we pull that back into the system and whether it's an operational conversation that we need to have about processes or it's potential enhancements of the product. Those things are all organized, and we do give our clients a voice to talk to us about that. And then there's the more proactive piece, right? There's some things that are table stakes, like environment monitoring and making sure that uptime is where it needs to be. But then we dive a little deeper, and we like to make sure the metrics that you and I talked about earlier, we look at those every day. We want to make sure that our client environments are exactly where they need to be, and we will call out if there are anomalies, and it happens in fraud. You get bin attacks and mass compromise and fraud rings, and you have all of these things that can spike data. And we want to make sure our clients are okay. So we'll proactively reach out and say, hey, your volumes doubled yesterday. Everything okay, right? And what can we do to help? So you do have those questions, because sometimes we have to adjust some of our thresholds and automate a little more to make sure that the volume gets worked in time and those sorts of things. So we try to proactively monitor our clients' environments as well, just to make sure that, because sometimes we can see it in the data before they even realize they have a problem, right? And we don't want it to go too far and cost them money. So it's another sort of part of our service offering is that proactive client monitoring.
Excellent, excellent. We've got just a little bit of time left, so I was thinking maybe this might be an opportunity. We've covered so much material, it almost feels as like an introduction to fraud and dispute management, and into some of the other things we could talk about later. Maybe get you back to drill down on some of these areas, those four criteria that you talked about. But I thought maybe to wrap up, maybe you could give us sort of your top takeaways for FIs that know that they need to do better when it comes to fraud and dispute management, are not exactly sure how to get started, which way to turn. What are some of the things that they should be keeping in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think really trying to understand where your pain points are. And I think it's difficult to identify those things when you're sort of inside of your house, right? So, kind of open your mind, there's a ton of good industry expertise here and networks that you can talk to other folks about what they're seeing. But really understanding what your pain points are, right? Understanding where you are today, and then really setting goals for where you want to be with this tomorrow. I mean, that's our favorite conversation to have with prospects. It's, okay, what are your pain points today? If not, I'll help you figure them out if you're not quite sure. And then here's what this could look like for you in the future. So let's set some goals and create a roadmap for that. But I think that's sort of number one is understanding where you are today, right? And that really sets you up to help build your business case, to help get buy-in from the rest of the organization. The one thing about back office fraud and disputes is it's not quite as sexy as fraud authorizations and fraud prevention and detection. So it doesn't always get the same attention, but that's where we can really help, and we can really start to show what those savings and the value look like, so that you can get the buy-in within your organization to make a move on this. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, don't be afraid of change. This has been solved the same way for most financial institutions since I started in this space on January 10th, the year 2000. That was a long time ago. And it just has not evolved in a significant way. And that's where we come in, right? We are going to force this evolution because we know that this is best for cardholders and this is best for financial institutions. It's the best path forward. So don't be afraid of that change. We have seen a lot, and we have learned a lot even through this process. So every time we add a new client, we learn something new. We learn a better way to do it. We have all these best practices from across so many different clients now. We put those all into the system. So don't be afraid to take some chances and make a change in the way that you're processing these cases. I think if you can tackle those two things, understand your problem, don't be afraid to change it. Quavo can help you come out on the other side of that with a really, really good solution. That's, like I said, that's great for your account holders. It's great for your institution, and it should be, hopefully help the users and the managers, to be better as well. I mean, nobody wants to go into work every day and struggle through their software technology and their business process, right? So that's, kind of another side goal or side benefit we have. Like, we want our users to love us too, right? So, and that's where we'll help people get to.
Excellent, excellent. Again, just wrapping things up, in terms of, you mentioned where you would like things to get to, where do you anticipate Quavo getting to in 2024? Is there anything we should be keeping our eyes open for?
Yeah, there's some really, really exciting stuff that I'm happy to talk about here for a minute. One of the things that we continue to do, and I mentioned earlier, sort of that assembly line approach, and we allow the solution to own the case through the process, is we continue to look for opportunities to bring technology in and automate more of this process. I mean, we can get up to 95, 97%, as I had mentioned. But I have a dream that is 100% automation. And maybe we don't ever get there, but I'd like to get as close as possible so we continue to automate those tasks along the way. One of the really exciting ways we're doing that is with Gen AI. You hear the buzzword and people talk about Gen AI, and I see a lot of the use cases that people are doing out there, and I think, well, that's just you using Gen AI for the sake of saying you did it. But what we're really trying to do is find true functional advantages to using that sort of technology. And one of the biggest places for us is we deal with a lot of documentation that comes back in. Maybe the cardholder sends something in, or maybe the merchant will send something back in related to this fraud transaction or this dispute. And for the longest time, people have to review those things. And what we're really trying to do is take those documentations, extract the text out of it, run that through the Gen AI to come out with real recommendations on what to do based on this documentation that's come back in, because it's not standard. There's no template. A merchant can write something on a napkin and send it in if they feel like it. So you have to use this sort of cutting edge technology to understand that data and to make really, really good decisions based off of it. So that is probably the most exciting thing that for me that we're working on this year. The second most exciting is just more data. We love data. We want to get it out into the world, into the hands of our clients, into the broader fraud and disputes network, so that people can really start to understand how we're changing this space for the better and looking at metrics in a way that nobody has before. If I left 2024 and we had made significant strides in Gen AI and data, I will be very, very happy.
Sounds good. Sounds very exciting and very interesting as well. I'm thinking just in terms of finishing things up, if folks are interested in getting in touch with you, as I hope that they would be after hearing some of the things that you've had to say, are there any better channels that folks who want to find out more about Quavo that they can pursue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can go right to Quavo.com. There's a contact form on there. We look at those constantly. I mean, that is probably the best way that goes directly to our account executive team, our client solutions teams. And we will get back to you pretty much within the same day that you reach out. I would say provide as much detail as the tech spot leaves space for. We love to understand the situation as you're going in. So yeah, I mean that's probably the best way. I mean, if I could give people my phone number and tell them to text me, I would also do that, but maybe not the approach. But yeah, I think that's definitely the best way to get a hold of us. And we're constantly checking that to make sure that if anybody has questions for us, or it's even just exploring. We're happy to help people. If you're not looking to buy anything this year, maybe you're looking at a 25 project. That's fine. We're happy to help you with some of your diligence efforts around that stuff. We really do like talking about this use case. Obviously we're a business, but I think our passion is, helping this use case become, much more innovative and much more efficient inside of banking.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much for spending some time with us and telling a little bit more about Quavo fraud and dispute and the important work that you're doing in a very, very important area of fraud and dispute management. As more and more, as you said, as you're getting involved in card issuing and payments and so forth, this is something I suspect we're going to be hearing a lot more about this year, and we'd love to hear about more of it from you. So hopefully we'll be able to get you back.
Great. Thanks, David. I'd love to come back. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for joining us as well. Have a great day.